can significantly increase their productivity, but one of the biggest challenges is the fear of drought. And so we partnered with a local African NGO and CIMIT, which is a big public research institution, the Gates Foundation and others, 5 African governments, to develop more drought-tolerant white corn or white maize seed for these farmers so that they can better adapt to climate change, so that they can feed their family. White maize is a staple for 300 million smallholder farmers in Africa. They all grow it, and they get some of the lowest yields in the world. And so with this project, we're trying to really give them the kind of insurance they need from a drought so that they can make those investments and start to have a more sustainable food supply for themselves.
So tell them about our yields.
So this year we had our first, this is about a 7-year project. A lot of R&D has gone on, and we just launched the first hybrid in Kenya, and the yields are about 4.3, 4.5 tons per hectare compared to 1.8, which is the national average. So already a big increase, and that's just the beginning. We have a whole pipeline of new hybrids coming, and we developed this so that every seed company in Africa can access these improved seeds. The idea being that we see Africa as a real market opportunity, but right now there's a lot of work to get the market really developed. We want farmers to have lots of choices.
And all the models show that Africa is going to be one of the hardest hit from a climate change modeling. So being able to invest in these technologies and tools is, I think, going to be really important to mitigate those long-term implications.
I'm from Columbus, Ohio. A couple weeks ago, maybe a month ago, we just had the city of Toledo had to shut down its water plant because we had some giant algae blooms in Lake Erie, and those algae blooms are really attributed to all the fertilizer that Ohio farmers are using when they run off into the streams and get into the lake and whatnot. What's the future of agriculture if American farmers don't use fertilizers going forward? Are they part of how the African farmers are going to increase their crop growth? And can we keep feeding the world's population if we're using fewer and fewer fertilizers?
I think the real opportunity is to be able to use fertilizers more effectively and more efficiently. A couple of things. When I grew up as a kid, I grew up on a small farm in central Illinois, not too far from Columbus, and we always put down all of our fertilizer in the fall, and then we watched it disappear during the crop year. Today, farmers have the tools to feed the crop when it's needed. So being able to use the nitrogen at the right time when it's the most beneficial. The other tool is going to be the precision ag tools. Instead of applying it at the same rate all across the field, we can now vary it with the equipment that will follow both the contour and the field in terms of what's needed on a specific land unit basis. And I think the tools of precision farming and application will enable us to be much smarter in the use of nitrogen. I work with a number of states and governments on this topic. So not only does Ohio have some of those challenges, but so does Illinois and Iowa. And I think there's a huge opportunity to be a lot smarter in how we use nutrients.
So the current formula for fertilizer, will that somehow change in the future? Will we be able to make something that's better?
I think it will change in a couple areas. So there's always new formulations, slow release formulations coming up. The other area that you see is this timing. It used to be you put it all down in the fall. Now what we've learned that the genetics with these new seeds that we're developing allow farmers to get benefit from putting nitrogen down late spring and even during the middle of the crop. So by spreading out that risk, it helps them economically, but it also avoids that issue where in the spring you get the big rainfall and all the nutrients wash off into the stream. So that will help enormously in terms of both the cost, the efficiency, and the environmental impact of farming.
The whole issue of no-till farming, it's been around for decades. Is that, are farmers doing that, or is it still sort of an outlier strategy?
I mean, basically all the acres in South America are no-till farming. Here in the U.S., probably about 60% of the acres are no-till, and that's been a huge benefit. Again, when I grew up on the farm, we would spend all fall tilling the soil. All that ended up doing was releasing all the water and then causing erosion. Today, we plant right into that crop seed bed with modern equipment, and you have eliminated a lot of that damage. So it's been a big boost.
At the summit tomorrow, there is going to be an emphasis on agriculture and what can be done to address the impact of climate change and how to mitigate it. What's some solutions that you could see coming to the table? What's a realistic realistic option from a global perspective?
So first of all, breeding seeds for better drought tolerance is an enormous opportunity, and that was the project that Natalie talked about specifically for Africa. We're doing that for other crops around the world. And then breeding seeds for better disease and insect resistance so that they can withstand the challenges of microclimatic, microenvironment changes that are going to be really important. With even a 1 or 2 degree shift in temperature changes literally when an insect will hatch or lay its eggs, and so having the combination of the tools that allow us to monitor that, as well as the better genetics in the seed, can go a long way.
And one other thing I'd mention is partnerships like one we have with Conservation International in Brazil, really trying to help prevent deforestation and keep more trees out there. So if you can help farmers grow more on the land they already have in agriculture, you really decrease that incentive for
we are big believers, and I think a lot of the environmental groups, an answer is sustainable intensification. How do we take the lands that we farm today and farm them so that they're farmed well and sustainably, but where the yields are dramatically increased, and that takes the pressure off of converting the next wetland or the next forest, because in the end people will eat and food will be provided. There will be a demand. We can decide how to do that even more smartly in the future.
Right, and it's an interesting tack because I was at the march yesterday, and there were a lot of people who were here for climate change, and there were also a lot of people with posters that said no GMO foods, and this is the kind of stuff that your products, your technology might be able to help address some of the issues that they see. I mean, how do you make this case to the environmental community?
Two things. So I think what I would call are the environmental groups who are really serious about the environment already appreciate this, and many of the groups like World Wildlife, Conservation International have already recognized that the biggest risk to the environment is low production agriculture, low yield agriculture, and the best solution again is sustainable intensification. And so I think we can work with and partner. In many ways, I've talked about it often at this meeting. The conversation around GMOs is an acronym, but it's also sidetracks the real discussion on what we need to do to have food security for a growing world. I mean, between now and 2050, the demand for food will double. If we farm the same way we do today in 2050, we'll farm twice as much land and we'll see huge environmental destruction. That's not what I want for my kids. I would like to see us have smart policies, use the technologies that enable us to, double production or maybe even triple it in Africa and parts of Asia, and be able to farm, sustainably and intensively.
We had some colleagues that were in that march too, because they believe very much in the importance of that issue, and that's why I think the power here is when a company recognizes that kind of societal benefit it can bring through its business and its business engine. That's when you're going to get the real impacts at scale that we're going to need to solve these big challenges.
We've talked a lot about aquaculture and hydroponics. It's always sort of been like an outlier kind of technology.
Now
some people do it.
Half of the seafood in this country is now provided by aquaculture.
Yeah, exactly. So, is there an opportunity going forward that in places where there's no water, and we don't want to use soil, and we don't want to use pesticides, that we can do massive aquaculture growing in places, deserts, or in Africa where folks need food, and now they can grow fresh stuff right there, and they don't have to use.
It's outside of our business. We're primarily focused on better seeds for farmers, but a lot of the soybean and corn protein that come from our fields are now used as the source of nutrient for aquaculture. So we're distantly related to that. I follow it because I believe that there's a lot of solutions. Like I said, today over half of the seafood in the United States comes from aquaculture, and that's going to only increase. And so that will be a real part of sustainability for the future, I believe.
Earlier in the conversation, you were talking about more micro mapping, so we can see what's going on in particular. Last night I just
interrupt, but I want to be cognizant of time. We have about 5 minutes before the plenary, so
I'm going to hop over. Yeah.
Let me give you an expanded business card that has a thumb drive on it that has a lot of background on GMOs, some of the talks and stuff that I've given, some of the articles I've written, as well as a few factoids.
So let me finish up my two little quotes. So last night I happened to be reading an article about all the fantastic things that Larry Page at Google wants to do.
Yep.
And one of their projects that I hadn't heard of was called down to the inch mapping.
Yep.
Okay. Yep. Is there the possibility at some point in the future that we'll start embedding plants with little sensors that are going to feed back to us now that we put sensors in clothing and in bridges that tell us, hey, I'm under stress and we should go. Will plants start talking to us?
I don't know if the plants might, but I think we can also be a lot smarter in understanding what the plants are already saying. So, for example, there's a lot of work on satellite imagery that is studying fields. Most of the fields in the United States have already been mapped, with Google-type software, and now we're starting to sub-map each field in terms of its properties. The average new car that you buy today has over 3,000 sensors. In a few years, the average tractor and the average planter and the average combine are going to have that same type of sensing capability, so on a real-time basis, farmers can understand what's going on in their soil, in their fields, and in their crops. So
interesting.
We'll see really dramatic changes. Thanks.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Enjoyed it.
Yep.